What's up guys, Kantyash here. You don't know me and I don't know you, but that doesn't matter. I decided to make this video because this is probably the best build I've ever played, so it seemed worth sharing. Obviously, people have made Berserker spell builds in the past, and they've made Frostbolt builds in the past, but this is how I did it. So let's start with the idea behind the build. I was playing the Mortem Morsel Poison build, but it felt annoying to get all my stats in order. You need crit damage, accuracy, ES, attack speed, all that stuff. And it just doesn't seem all that worth the effort. I thought about rolling Hoa as I've played it in Bridge, but it's even more effort because you need to stack int. So I figured, alright, what eliminates the need for all those stats? Spells. You always hit, you don't need to go crit since elemental overload exists, and you can just get your resist and some ES and you're ready to go. Now what's the biggest problem with spells? It's hard to get reliable leech. Warlord's Mark doesn't help versus hexproof monsters and makes hexproof maps pretty unrunnable. The radius on blasphemy isn't all that great, and with the AoE changes I imagine it's even worse. Not to mention it wastes mana reservation that you could use for a damage or defensive aura. You can also use life gem, but that's obviously one less gem link, which in the path of more multipliers is a giant hit to your damage. Finally, you can get some Ally Leech on gear, but the Ally Leech values on gear are so small that it seems sketchy at best, especially for bosses. So what's the alternative? Berserker. Having 1% life and mana generic damage leech, and 2% if you've killed recently, makes it the only good and reliable source of leech for spell builds. In addition to that, Berserker offers some nice attack speed and a 40% more multiplier to all of your damage, which means it also double dips. Now, it also has the downside, making you take 10% increased damage, which sounds scary, but from playing with it, while that's only anecdotal evidence, I can tell you that it feels very negligible. Since I've had a foundation for the build, it was time to choose the spell that I'm going to use. The choice came down to Freezing Pulse and Frostbolt, as those are the two spells that receive threshold jewels that grant additional projectiles in 2.6. In the end, I've decided on Frostbolt, as the extra projectile speed mod seemed more valuable than extra damage if you shattered recently bonus that the Freezing Pulse jewel granted. Because while the projectile speed helps with clearing trash and you're pretty starved on that stat, the extra damage on shatter only grants you extra damage while clearing the map and not when killing the map boss, which is when you really need it. You can see that the path I take is close to many life nodes, which is what I took while leveling. I respec into CI at around level 80, 78 if I recall correctly. Around level 91 I got shafts from Gadiro and started considering switching to low life, which I ultimately did at 93 once I farmed out the money for presence of Chayula, which seemed mandatory to maintain a high ES pool. Now you might be thinking, this build was supposed to be low maintenance without stacking stats and blah blah blah, but you have Duriani's, Chayula's presence, shaft, this is bullshit. And I agree, this is expensive. But I've only switched to all this at 93 and frankly it doesn't make or break the build. I was able to get to 93 while being CI and wearing Incandescent Heart, Heartbreaken and Rainbow Strides. If that doesn't convince you, before I was ready to switch to low life, I didn't even bother with getting my Cruel and Merciless Ascendancies, which is a 40% damage multiplier that I was missing and still farming fine. In addition to that, I was and still am operating on a 5 link, so again, I'm missing a fat damage boost. I hope it all illustrates that you don't need expensive gear to make this build work, you just need 2 jewels and a dream, basically. Now let's go over the links. I'm using Frostbolt, linked with Spell Echo, Faster Casting, Control Distraction and Call to Fire. All of those except for Call to Fire seem pretty self-explanatory, so let's focus on that. I didn't want to use Elemental Focus because occasional freezes seemed like a good defensive precaution, albeit inconsistent. I also didn't want to use slower projectiles since I don't have all that much proc speed and I feel like it would annihilate my clear speed. Another option was faster projectiles, but it seemed like more of an utility link than a damage link, and currently I feel okay with my proc speed, so not sure if it's worth it, although it's definitely an option. I also tested a level 2 Empower, but it was less damage than Cold Fire. The last option is Cold Penetration, and it's definitely a good one. I think the best course of action would be to use faster projectiles for clearing and swapping in Cold Pen for bosses. But I don't like swapping gems, so I decided against it. I think the main benefit of Cold to Fire, aside from being a nice multiplier, is that it makes majority of your DPS fire damage, and you have a lot of elemental damage on the tree, as well as the Fat Berserker 40% more damage node, so the ignites you inflict get a nice double dip boost, which definitely helps with your overall damage. For the 6th link, I'll consider either swapping around Empower and Fire Pen, or swapping around Faster Proc and Cold Pen or Slower Proc for bosses. For my flasks, I'm using a generic setup: Quicksilver for Blitz, Jade for Ignites, Basalt for Freezes, and a Silver flask for Shocks. In addition to that, I'm running the Wise Oak flask, which provides me with a bit of fire penetration and makes me more resistant to cold damage. Obviously, you could optimize your resistances to get more benefit from the flask, and I kinda had that going with having 195% fire res and 190% of cold and lightning. But then I got a crystal belt and it all got fucked up. Oh well. I prefer the Wise Oak instead of Atziri's Promise because the Atziri Flask only inflates your tooltip and doesn't actually help you with damage when you really need it, which is on bosses where penetration trumps all. Something you can do, and what I kinda wanted to test, is dropping both of your healths and running Grace instead, and specking Elemental Equilibrium to get even better pen on bosses with Orb of Storms. You'd lose a bit of damage on Trash and some of your 2-tip DPS, but I think it would barely be noticeable, especially after getting a 6th link, and the benefit when fighting bosses would be crazy. You'd also be able to drop Frostbolt and use something like Lightning Trap instead, which would further aid your DPS, making your single target damage absolutely disgusting. Okay, I think I went over everything that I wanted to go over. I hope you guys like the build and I encourage you to try it. I'll link the skill tree in the description, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. Peace!